before agriculture, and not a little bit before, a couple of thousand years before, in the Middle Stone Age, you had people following wild herds of animals. Oh, it's okay, I don't mind them. And gathering wild grains as they went. Then about this time of year, they'd meet up and they'd brew. That was part of their social ceremony, whatever they were doing. And in archaeological digs, where you find graves, for instance, they'd send their relatives to the afterlife with a mug of beer. So you get the residues of meadowsweet, the pollen, the flowers, the plant matter that was used to flavour that beer. Because the special thing about meadowsweet is the sweetness isn't due to sugar. It's like stevia, it's a plant sweetener. And when it ferments, that doesn't get consumed. So you can put it in something like meats, honey, wine. When that ferments, it goes completely dry. But put in some mead sweet, which is another name for it, you will get a sweet mead. And also, it's not bitter at all. But if you're using it fresh, you get a really nice sort of sour taste of the stems. And I think, especially if you're brewing for children, sweet and sour might work better than sweet and bitter. You know, you have to play to your audience. But not all of these things are things I'd recommend in the modern age. For instance, this is St. John's wort. You might have heard of it. It's used as a herbal antidepressant. You might have been warned about it, because it will interfere with non-herbal antidepressants and blood thinners and heart medications and certain forms of birth control and a few other things. So I'd leave this in the flower garden nowadays unless you're under medical supervision from a herbalist who really knows their stuff. Yarrow's another one that's not bitter, but if you use it fresh you get the nice sourness, and it's a very good herb to know nowadays, because its other name is all heal. It's called that because it will stop bleeding and help heal minor wounds. And actually in the medieval era, you'd have barber surgeons taking this into battle to try and stop bleeding on the battlefield. And it's a good coagulant. I don't know if it's an antiseptic, but if you're out in the countryside and you skin your knee or you get some other minor wound, you can pick some yarrow and rub it on, same way that you'd use a dockman leaf or nettle, and it'll stop the bleeding. It's good stuff. But also a brewing herb. Now, this is another one that I wouldn't recommend. This is called tansy, and you'd have some in your garden in the 15th century, definitely. Because a few times a year you'd want a good dose of this to kill intestinal parasites. Now that's not something you think about nowadays unless you're going somewhere really exotic where they maybe don't have as good sanitation. But in medieval Europe it wasn't a case of, oh, do you have worms? It's, how bad are your worms? And tansy was the best worm killer we had. So, but in brewing, the thing about tansy is it's intensely bitter. It's too bitter. It's also quite toxic to the liver, but it's aromatic. It's a bit like chamomile. So what you might do with this is mix it with something a bit more benign. Now this is mugwort. Before hops were introduced, mugwort was the favourite brew. It was actually, because you can use it dry, it was the favourite brew it all over Europe. You'd take your mugwort and then you'd add in other herbs. And there were people who did this professionally. You know, it was a job. So I think if you combine your mugwort and your tansy, you might get something that's a lot nicer to drink. Now, you might have heard of heather ale, heather beer, the famous drink of the Picts. Because there's this story that in ancient times, the Picts saw this as the best thing and they had a secret that made it palatable. Because here's the thing about brewing with heather. If you use enough to make the beer keep, you will end up with something that's far too bitter to drink. And some of the old recipes use as much heather as they use malt. That would have been an intensely bitter liquid. But I can actually share with you the real secret.